us. I think I've already been introduced, but again, my name is Gregory Williams and the president of Gregory Ramon Design Studio. I've been working for over 18 years. Really, I started out in healthcare architecture at a larger firm. There's about 140 people there. Did a lot of patient wing renovation projects, replacement hospital projects, and really I learned a tremendous amount from that experience. But one of the things that I think from that, I understood that I did like smaller firms. So I transitioned to smaller firms and really took advantage of the opportunity to learn as much as possible in those environments, because you get to wear many hats, and not just because you want to, but because you have to, because there's not as many people in those situations. So you end up learning a lot more very quickly. And I think those are some of the things that I've always been drawn to. I briefly mentioned, on the slide there, talk about building information modeling again. And again, it's just embedded into our workflow. And I think one of the things when we think about for residential construction, you can really benefit from using this software, because one of the things that's critical is really understanding quantities and understanding with a lot of the older projects that we work on. When I say older, I mean like the existing buildings. Sometimes you have tight spaces that you need to really understand how is certain equipment going to fit in there, and you can use that three-dimensional software to really figure out and know it before it ever gets constructed. And lastly, I've been teaching classes over at Dawson Technical Institute since 2012 in the construction management program. So I've come into contact with a lot of contractors, people who have been working in the field, and people who are interested in it too. So it's one of those things that's all related. Our team consists of Kaya Rial, and she's an architectural designer, and she's been there with us about 2 years. And she's completed numerous residential projects. And Letitia has been with us for a little over a year and has worn many hats too, including proposal development, existing condition surveys, submittal logs, and a lot of other day-to-day tasks. So, I know going into this, I know the intent again is to provide an understanding of when and how to work with an architect. But I think, again, in order to really talk about the when and the how, it's important to answer the question, what does an architect do? And so in asking that question, you see this slide here, you see the food on the side, you may be wondering, what does it have to do with an architect's role? And really, to me, I've always thought as an architect like a chef, because if you think about what a chef does, there's really a similar connection between the two. Because a chef is taking, many dissimilar ingredients or spices, which by themselves alone don't necessarily work well. You wouldn't just eat a teaspoon of salt and pepper by themselves. But if you combine those, a chef kind of combines that in a way that creates something that tastes good. And so if we think about an architect in the same way, we're taking the project goals, the ideas, budget, the needs and wants of the project, your code requirements, any site constraints, functional and aesthetic requirements that may be out there, to create a project which becomes the balance of all of those different inputs. So essentially, the architect is really there to come up with the master plan that takes all of these elements and interprets it in a way that creates something that everyone involved can really understand, and then take what was an idea and turn it into a reality. So, in talking about what we do, what does it take to become an architect? I think that's also something important just to look at for a second. So, all 50 states in the US and, the other jurisdictions as well, they have an architecture board that regulates the practice of architecture within that state. And so those boards also issue licenses to the architects as well. So there's, if you can see in the slide here, you have an education requirement, which means that we have to go to a National Architectural Accrediting Board, or what's just sometimes referred to as NAB, accredited school, to earn either a BArch, a Bachelor of Architecture, or a Master's of Architecture. And that can take anywhere from 5 to 6 years. And, once you're done with school, you have your degree, then there's an experience requirement, right? So you're required to gain and document actual project experience under the supervision of a licensed architect, in multiple different areas of the project, over the course of a minimum of 3 years is what it used to be. I think now things have changed to where there's been a shortage of architects. So they've kind of changed, what some of these requirements are in terms of when you can go take an exam. But it used to be you get all the experience and then you can go and sit for the exams. Right now, there's currently 6 individual exams that you take. And again, there have been more in the past. When I took it, there were 9, but they're again trying to make it somewhat more palatable for people to go in and do that. But once you take the exam, pass it, then you're able to apply for your license, and you get your license in the state that you took the exam first. And then one of those acronyms that we were talking about earlier, NCARB, that's the organization that once you're licensed in one state, they make it easier for you to get licensed in any other 50 states by paying a fee typically and filling out an application. Unless you're looking to get licensed in Florida or California, where they have another exam. So if we just put this in perspective, really the average time it takes to become an architect from the time you go to school to the time you get out, this is average time, is about 12 and a half years. It was almost like going to, become a doctor in a way. It's, you think of architects as almost like building doctors, because there's a lot of effort that goes into getting the license. So, just as a comparison, just so we can talk about, reasons why you want to bring architects on board, I do want to just, bring up the information about what does it take to become a general contractor. And really let me preface this by saying that these are just the requirements for the city of Chicago. If you look on the Department of Buildings website, you can find the same information. All other states and even, villages and other jurisdictions may have different criteria for, obtaining a general contractor license. But, and typically all of the trades do have to take some type of trade licensing exam. So there is some assurance that they are going to be experienced in what they do, because you have to go through an examination process for trades. So mechanical, electrical, plumbing, your HVAC, those are specialty things. But in terms of, what does it take to become a GC, really there's three main things. And this is right off of the city site per Continental Testing Services. That's the company that regulates this. So basically there is an application that you can download and complete. And the GC, if we're thinking about residential, a GC selects their project value, meaning there's a certain class level. Typically for a lot of residential projects, Class E is the one that people will choose, because the ceiling on the Class E, classification E, license is $500,000. So with a lot of the residential projects going on in the city, rehabbing bungalows, they're not going to exceed that amount. So, a lot of people will choose that one. And the license fee for that is $300. The next item is you have to purchase insurance coverage, the general liability coverage, workers' comp. Those different costs are also required before they will issue you a license. And then once you pay the application fee and obtain the GC license, that total processing time might be 14 days. But once you have that information in hand, you can, they can legally represent themselves as a general contractor. And there is no experience requirement. But this is all, again, based on criteria in Chicago. So, really, again, the point of bringing this information up is just to really drive home, why you would really want to work with an architect on a project. Because I think, one of the things we have to think about as well is, when would you want to work with an architect too? Because again, there's a level of experience that comes with architects joining the project. So, a lot of times when you start a project, many times people may go to a general contractor to start the conversation. But really, and that's fine. You can talk to them. But I think one of the things that I want to just, put the point out there is you also want to make sure that you bring the architect in at the beginning as well, because there are so many other, implications that may not be known or may not be a given when you just start by talking to a general contractor. Because as we just saw, someone can have no experience in construction, get a license, and then represent themselves as a GC, but not really have an understanding of what the code implications are to certain ideas or design decisions that you may have up front when you discuss a project with the GC. Therefore, you could get a number that really doesn't align with what the actual requirements for that project are. So again, before you make any major decisions about the project, it's a good idea to bring the architect on and start discussions from that point. Now, for example, everyone may not be aware of code implications to adding additional bathrooms or wet bars or kitchens to an existing home. This is something that we see quite a bit. And, a lot of times in older properties, that incoming water line size isn't sufficient. It may be 3/4 of an inch in diameter, where, with the additional fixtures that you're adding, bathrooms, Jack and Jill baths, it may require that incoming water line size to be an 1.25 inches. And that's a cost implication that you may not have considered, which, on projects that we worked on, that could be anywhere from additional $12,000 to $20,000, really depending on how far away you are from the main, how long they have to run the line, how much of the street outside they have to tear up to get to it, and then the repair of the street after all that's done. So these are, that's just one code implication item that, it's a good idea to have these discussions up front. So at least you can, better make sure you understand what your actual goals are based on the budget that you have in place. So again, this is same points that we had earlier when talking about what does an architect do, but these are things that an architect can really help you with, right? Numerous project decisions based on initial goals and really the aspirations for the project. And I think that's in the planning stages is really where you line up and figure out, okay, what are we actually going to do based on the realistic budget that we have for this project? And I think that's really important too. An important point is helping you define your realistic budget, because, anything can be done on a project. I always tell people that you can do anything. You can have make a glass house if you want to, but things are going to be very, the cost is going to vary depending on what it is you're trying to do. So again, it's always making sure you share your realistic budget up front. And if you don't know, that's okay, because then the architect that you speak to can help you better hone in on what that number would be. And then you can make some decisions from that point. And, I think one of the things too on this list is bold at the bottom. I think probably the most important thing that an architect should do and can do is to listen to what your requirements are, what your needs are for the project. And then that way, if we hear what you're asking, then we can in turn really help you understand, okay, what can you do based on the things that you're asking or that you want to do. So moving forward, I think, how do you work with an architect? I think the biggest thing is just, you got to do some research. And, anytime people call us, I'll typically tell them, we'll give you a proposal, but reach out to someone else too. So you can have, multiple proposals, and then you'll be able to compare, what is this person offering versus what this person is offering, and that's always, one of the bigger things that people really want to make sure they do, because if you haven't worked with an architect before and you only get one proposal, then you don't really know what to expect from a scope of services, as well as what the cost might be. And the second one is get recommendations. You can always speak to people who have worked with architects. You can go on different websites. Like earlier I mentioned, the AIA, they have a website. You can go there and search different architects there. But, a lot of times, look around, see what projects are going on in the area that you live in, around. If you see any residential projects going up, see if there's a sign. Sometimes people have signs out in yards to say who's doing the work on that one. That's another way to locate architects. But I think it's important to really do the research on an architect, because again, you're essentially, whenever you do decide to work on a project, you're establishing a relationship that you may have for depending on how complex the project is, how much work is involved. You could be on the project for 2, 3, 4 months, and then even during construction, you probably have some interactions with the architect. So it's important to research, and then conduct some interviews with them too. Just talk to them. Do a phone call or in person, just so you can really get an understanding of who you're going to be working with too. So as you're comfortable with working with the person, and later on, if you've established that relationship, then you don't really have to worry about any issues related to necessarily getting along with the person right after you sign the contract. So I think, like I said, the most important question that people always, this is the first thing that most people will ask before they ask about what are you going to provide, how do you work, what am I going to get? It's like, how much, what does it cost? And again, it's understandable. You're spending money, hard-earned money on something. And I think the thing with architectural, drawings, construction drawings is that the difference between that and other things, it's not necessarily tangible. You can't go to the store and find it on a shelf and there's a price for it right there. It's different because you may not have a understanding of what are you going to get. So I think the biggest thing is to understand what is it that I'm getting for the cost that you're asking me. And first though, let's just take a quick look at some of the some industry standards, right, for cost on architectural projects. So, if we think about the average residential renovation construction costs, and this is not every residential project, these are projects that we worked on in our office based on the types of scope that we picked up or that we worked on. A lot of times we might be doing a basement renovation project. We've done some additions, some full gut rehabs. So on average, these are some of those projects. Others have gone above this, but if we just look at the average cost of what are you spending on construction for those projects, $40,000 to $80,000, that's a pretty significant number. So when we think about what's the industry standard pricing structure for architectural fees, okay, it's a big range, but that range has to do with project size, complexity of the project, existing versus new construction. New construction tends to be cheaper because it's easier to access. There are no unknowns. But the range here that we're talking about is between 7 and 20% of the estimated or assumed construction costs. So if we just say 10%, which is more of a typical range, 10% of 80,000 is really, when you think about it, for the services and the kind of the project management expertise that you're getting is not that much. And I think that's the biggest thing, is to really understand, that the fact that when you hire an architect, you're not just hiring someone who's going to create a drawing for you so that you can go get it built. You're hiring someone who has, a level of experience that's, that they're going to be able to help manage the project, help to organize the information about the project into the drawing so that you have a constructible set of documents. They're also going to help you with developing and understanding what the cost would be, because a lot of times the architects they can help you with developing a cost estimate for the project. And again, even when you have the drawings, once you have the drawings, even if they help you develop cost estimates, it's still a good idea to put those drawings out to different contractors so you can get some bids from those GCs to really understand what the actual cost will be. But the point of the architects helping you with that initial cost estimating exercise is to help you understand the budget, the potential budget for the project. And typically the reason why you want to do that is always, always, for one, you always want to bid off of the drawings, because a lot of times if you have a GC walk the space with you before you have any drawings completed, and one, the drawings provide specification or specificity. So you'll know what types of materials are you talking about, what's the finish level of items. If you have, interior finishing in the project, what is the true scope of work? Sometimes when you just walk a building, you may not be thinking about all the other implications to a design decision. So I think the drawings really help to visually quantify that information for you, so that it makes it easier to understand, what the actual scope is, and therefore allowing the contractors who receive those drawings to bid those drawings properly. So, really when you look at it, the main thing is always like, okay, is it worth it, for the price that someone's asking for you to pay them in order to do those documents or do those drawings. And, again, just remember, what does an architect bring to the table? I mean, you have the experience factor there. There's also the expertise of understanding how to work with the building department, how to work with the different code officials on the projects too, and really a understanding of the code. I mean, the code is really sets the parameters for any project that we're working on. And I think that's one of the key factors, in addition to, understanding design from a functional standpoint and an aesthetic standpoint. All of those things will play into, how that project experience from, years down the line. Again, it's, you think if you put that in terms of life cycle cost, that initial cost that you pay the architect to develop the project for you, and let's say if it's a house that you're buying to live in, you're there for 20 years, you divide that out over 20 years, that's nothing for the services that you're getting and the value that you've gained from actually having someone who's studied and practiced for a number of years to be able to pull together, like I said, all these dissimilar elements to make a product or something that you're comfortable with being in the space, or where you just enjoy being there on a regular basis. And this is this graphic here, the triangle, is one of those things where it's just a visual to help understand, how do different factors play. If you want something done quickly, want it done for a low cost, or if it's high quality, how do you get these things? And there's always a thing of, you can't have all three on any given project. So a lot of times if someone's looking for low cost and they want it done quickly, then cheap and quick tends to be low quality. And we've seen sets of drawings that people bring to us to ask if we can then redo the project, because now they can't get a permit because they initially paid a very low fee to someone to do a set of drawings that can't be constructed, and the city won't accept them and will not issue a permit. So if again, it's just like with anything, you pay for what you get, right? And if you spend a little bit of money on something, typically you're going to have to replace that more often than you would if you spend a little more on it, and it's a little bit higher quality, and the life cycle of that is going to last a little bit longer. It's the same thing with services too. And again, if we look at the fast and good orange triangle, typically fast and good is going to be expensive, but there's a medium in there too, because you can have high quality and you can have a good project, but sometimes it may not be able to get put together in a week. Maybe it's going to take 3 weeks to pull it together, because again, there's other information that's going into that document set that we want to make sure that it's thorough, that everyone that picks it up, the city officials, can look at it and say, okay, we checked this off. We know they at least have the minimum, they've covered the minimum requirements. And that's the other thing too, just to throw out there, is the code, the building code is just asking for the minimum requirements to be met. Sometimes we can go above and beyond depending on what the goals are for the project, but the code is really just talking about minimum. And I think that's one of the, just one of the things to remember when we talk about it. And like I said, I like this image just because it's really a way of showing, you get what you pay for. So, it says itself. I don't have to say anything else about it really. This is just what it is. So just keep that in mind. And, remember whenever you do reach out to architects, it's, you're establishing, you're becoming a part of a team with them along with the contractor. And again, I know I have the slides talking about what does it take to become each, but the best projects in my experience have been those where everybody is brought in at the beginning, where if you know a GC that you want to have on the project, bring them on at the beginning, bring the architect on so they can all sit down and talk about the project. That way you can have a very unified idea about what can really be done with the budget that's in place and with the skill set that's available too, in terms of, maybe in construction, if we're trying to do some very sophisticated details or details that are too, that don't make a lot of sense to do, then sometimes the contractors say, hey, we know there's another way to put this together. So I think those are best when you have everyone at the table at the same time. And, that's a project delivery, what some people might refer to as integrated project delivery methods, where it's not a design, bid, build, which is where you typically have a process of designing the project, then you bid it out to contractors, then they build after they make a selection. So I'm not sure on where we are on time, but
we are actually we're going to go into our Q&A. Perfect. So we did have a couple of questions. Ms. Gonzalez would like to know if you could go back to her GC screen because she was taking notes there. And she also had an additional question of how would a beginner know if an architect is needed?
So one thing you can do, and this is a great resource, is if you go to the City of Chicago's Department of Buildings website, they have a section on there when a permit is needed. And it outlines, depending on what you're doing on the project, if you are moving electrical, if you're moving plumbing, if you're reconfiguring spaces, then you need drawings to get a permit to do that work. There are also permits classified as easy permits with the city, and those don't require drawings. Like if you're doing a re-roof, typically you don't need or drawings for that. Or if you're upgrading your electrical service, that can be done without drawings as well. But I would say the best resource is the City of Chicago's Department of Buildings website if you're in Chicago. If you're not in Chicago, I would just check the website of the village or other jurisdiction, because everyone will tell you typically what is, when a permit is needed or when drawings are needed for a particular project. And typically that's, just in general, it's when you're configuring or changing a space and you're potentially affecting the health, safety, and life safety of participants in the building or occupants in the building. Because if you go in and redo plumbing and the plumbing isn't properly, the waste and the supply somehow get cross-contaminated or mixed, that's an issue. So anything that the city needs to come out and observe and inspect prior to it being closed up is typically when you're going to need to have a set of drawings to go along with that.
Okay. We have another question. What is your role when working with the contractor?
What is the architect's role when working with the contractor?
Yes.
So after the design process has been completed, and this depends on the project too, because sometimes on residential projects, we may not be paid to continue providing construction administration services, but our role from a contractual standpoint is, and what that falls under is construction administration, means going out to the job site, doing observations to see if the construction is being done in accordance with the drawings. That's one of the biggest things that architects can provide, because remember, they're the ones who have been working on the drawings for a month, 2 months, 3 months, depending on the size of the project. They could have been working on those drawings for a year. So they're going to know it in and out. And they're the best person to actually be able to go out and observe the construction as it's going on. And typically what that benefits the owner, because the owner may not be as involved with that design process. So this person is going out, making a report, taking pictures, and is able to catch things if something comes up that doesn't quite look like it's being done according to the drawings. Also, okay, go ahead.
It sounds like that, if you are paying and getting your money's worth from your architect, there may be some project management roles that the architect is actually facilitating for you during the process.
Exactly. And most architects really prefer to have involvement during the construction phase, because I mean that is really the completion of the project, really, because we've gone through the process of pulling the drawings together, and it's advantageous to have us involved during the construction to make sure that what has been documented, what has been presented throughout, actually comes through at the end. And again, if it's a simple project that doesn't require them to be on site, every week, then that's fine too. But I think sometimes, we may be on site weekly, bi-weekly, once a month. It really depends on what the scope of the work is and how often the contractors are on site working as well.
I know that some architects is it self-certified? I believe that's the term is.
Yes.
And what does that mean exactly?
So self-certification is a certification status with the city of Chicago that basically allows you to self-review your drawings. Basically, you still submit it to the Department of Buildings, but it allows you to review it, and then it bypasses the review from each of the different trade reviewers at the city, different disciplines. So, for example, if you're self-certified, when you submit your drawings, instead of it getting routed to the HVAC reviewer, the plumbing reviewer, the electrical reviewer, and so on, they're going to send it directly to the final stage of review. And that project manager will look it over. And since you have certified and provided a self-certification statement, they will stamp and sign off on it and provide a permit. I just sat for that in December. And one of the things, I don't know if anybody on the call has used self-certification in the past or self-certified architects in the past, but in the past they had a really fast and expedited method of getting permits out. I think it was like two weeks you could get a permit on certain residential projects. They have discontinued that expedited path, where now it's typically a minimum of 30 days what it would take on a self-cert project. And we've had good experience just going through the standard plan review on projects again. And it's really, I think, really speaks to just understanding what they're looking for. A lot of our projects, on average, we've received a permit within 40 to 45 days. So you're only talking about 15 more days going that method versus the self-cert, which will incur more costs because they require on self-cert projects. If you're doing structural, they require structural calculations, stamp structural drawings, as well as a structural peer review. So you're adding additional costs to the project that, if you go the standard route, you can eliminate some of those costs off the project. So those are things that we typically will talk about with clients when we're discussing their project is, how soon are they trying to get started? And this is another reason why I think early on, if you have a project in mind, it's good to reach out to architects and start discussing it right away and get them on board. Because, we've also seen times where if people are thinking about a project, they've gone out and talked to the GC already. The GC's told them, hey, I can get it done in a month, but now they need drawings. And then there's an onus on the architects to finish them up super fast, but it may not be that can happen given the time frame. And then, again, time frame, the budget, all of those things are part of the project constraints that have to be considered.
And we have another question: from engagement to drawings and permits, what is the timeline at the architect/planning phase?
What is the timeline for? I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
From engagement to drawings and permits, what is the timeline at the architect/planning phase?
So to really to talk about that, it really depends on your project scope. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
for if we're talking about typical residential, rehab drawings or additions, it could be anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks of time, and that includes the time for discussing the project with the owner, developing some concepts. And, if the architects you're working with are developing 3D visuals, that's going to take a little bit longer because you're taking time to put in materials and really design a virtual representation of the building. Sometimes we do that on projects as well. But I would say, 3 to 4 weeks. And that really is inclusive of conversations with the client or with the owner about the project. And it really depends on the speed in which the communication happens too, right? Because once we give it to the client, if they take a week, then when I say 3 to 4 weeks, I mean 3 to 4 weeks of that project being in the architect's lap, not out for review or other things too.
And I guess one last question before we all move over back to the main waiting room. I saw that you are LEED certified. Can you give us a little bit about what that LEED certification is, and are you seeing anything in the work that you're currently doing? Since most of us are looking to do residential renovations, anything that the city is, looking for as far as making things more LEED certified.
Nina.
Does someone else say something?
I'm good. How are you?
Hey, how are you doing? So that's a great question. So yes, I am LEED accredited. I took that exam back in 2006. And basically what that is leadership in energy and environmental design. So they were one of the first organizations to really put a highlight or a focus on green building, because buildings are responsible for about 40% of all the emissions that are put into the atmosphere every year. And basically, in terms of how does that affect the projects that we're working on and what we're seeing? And to be honest with you, LEED was I think it was a great way to put a focus on the way buildings were constructed, the materials that were being used, because a lot of materials, prior to LEED had poison in them, basically. I mean, and people may have heard of sick building syndrome, or the fact that a lot of our, sheet wood products, MDF, plywood, a lot of those things had chemicals in them like formaldehyde. So, and these things off gas once you put them in a building. Off gas meaning they start to release vapors and fumes. So what LEED did was put the spotlight on manufacturers, and over the course of time, a lot of manufacturers have either eliminated certain products or certain chemicals and items in their products, or they've created other lines of products that are more environmentally friendly, more friendly to the people that are in the buildings. And I think from a just a high level point of view, what you're seeing is that not necessarily that projects that we're working on are going to be LEED certified, because there are cost implications to getting a LEED certification for a building. There's application fees. There are other fees that are associated with it. So a lot of times I think the biggest thing that did was put the focus also on building codes to change. So a lot of our energy codes have been updated and changed to reflect higher energy usage standards. There's also requirements for certain materials in different buildings that are out there that are just been added to our code right now. So a lot of times what we're doing when we look at projects is, how can we, we don't necessarily need to go out and get a LEED certification for residential projects, but how can we look at materials that we're using to make sure that, as a direction with our